Alright, it's time to glaze. This is just a paper towel. That is the most recommended tool for glazing fresh loose charcoal masses. You could also use the cotton t-shirt rag. So what you would want to avoid at this phase is something that's overly rough, like the brown paper towels in the classroom, or the other thing that can get in your way and create a lot of problems for you is if you attempt to glaze at this point with your chamois. The chamois, you need to think about the chamois as a kind of eraser. So I don't want to use this on my drawing that I've been working hard on right now. If I use the wrong tool to glaze, what's going to happen is it's going to wreck. It's going to soak up. It's just the chamois is too absorbent. It's going to soak off all of my hard work, and it's not going to leave enough of that residue that I like and that I want to stay intact as I develop this shape. Now, as you experiment, you can create, of course, exceptions and variations to this recipe, but this is my advice, is right now don't use a chamois and don't use something that's too coarse. You need just something that's like paper towel or cotton rag that's going to be a little bit absorbent, but not too absorbent. This is what I'm doing here. I'm folding that paper towel up into a little square rectangle. Just keep folding it in half. And I like to hold it like this in my hand. Probably seen that maybe in one of my other demos. And what I want to do is when I glaze, and this is what I like to say is this is kind of like, you know, it's like fresh snow or something. This is the one chance that you get to do this operation. It's fun. It's not really, shouldn't be stressful, but you need to be aware that if you do it wrong, it's hard to get this opportunity back again easily. So we're trying to take this fresh, loose charcoal, which we're calling mass tone, and we're trying to take that mass tone and get it to share its energy. And we're trying to drag it out broadly and smoothly and thinly, and what we're trying to do is fill in a lot of areas that we have previously left white. So that's one of the key things I need to teach you about, is that you don't want to glaze too carefully. And you don't want to glaze in such a way that you're saving the white. You have to be brave about this. You can't be afraid. What we need to do is take this fresh loose mass tone and get it to share its energy with all the rest of the paper that still is white. And that includes some of these smaller sections of white that are just like speckly. So here, let me show you. Again, once that mass is moved and it's glazed in, we don't get this opportunity for this kind of mark making anymore. It's not that you did it wrong, but if you like what's going on here, you should just take it hard and watch. So fresh loose charcoal, I've done very little blending or rubbing at all to this point. And I'm going to take a piece of paper towel, and I like to start up here, top left. And I just kind of think about this almost like I don't even see the drawing there, but kind of like I'm wiping something off or wiping something down. And I'm using on purpose, I love these big broad horizontal streaks that you just can't, it's hard to fake that stuff, and if you don't build this energy in right away at this phase, you're never going to get that critical mass, that buildup of the loose material that's going to allow you to cancel out these lit planes with as much control or, you know, as much I would say elegance as what's happening here. It's just one of those things. Sometimes it takes somebody who's done it a few times to open your eyes, I guess, about, you know, what to do when. But what I'm doing here is I'm trying to cancel out the white, but I'm also playing around with stuff that I'm smearing. It's that simple. I'm trying to smear stuff in kind of a fun way that looks energetic and looks bold and intriguing, and a lot of it's just going to get cleaned off. But again, if I don't build that energy in now, I don't really ever get the chance to revisit this quite in the same way. So what this is doing, this is glazing, and what that glaze is doing is it's clipping the ends off of our value range. And it's taking all of the tones inside of this image and it's forcing them more into the middle of our value scale. And so what we're doing is we're establishing a medium color here, a mid-tone that we can use our eraser to pull out. So once I've swiped at or wiped at this with paper towel, I'm just going to swipe over some of that lettering. So even just a little bit of dusting is going to make that charcoal much more stable and embedded. So just broad, quick swipes like you're dusting something or sweeping something. A lot of times that's sort of the, or lightly sanding something maybe is another metaphor. And be patient, you know, you get that charcoal glazed in, and it's going to become more stable. You can actually touch it now. Not much is really going to come off at this point. I don't want to put a lot of pressure or fingertips in these areas that are going to need to get lightened. So if I get too much fingers here, oil from my skin is going to prevent me from erasing. If I grind at this area too much with something dirty, it's also going to prevent me from erasing. So the idea is I'm trying to take the loose charcoal and spread it out into this kind of thin, loose, smudgy film. That's a transparent layer of charcoal. It's kind of a weird thing. It's a transparent layer of charcoal, and we're going to call that transparent layer a glaze. So how much, you know, pressure and force, and what you just have to experiment, but you can start to, after this phase, you can start to get rid of some of the speckles and some of the other things in the background by pressurizing your towels a little bit more. The other thing I'm going to start to do is go in and start to swipe at some of these transitions on the inside of the form, because this is really where a lot of the skill starts to become evident, is I have to come up with ways to blend and soften on the inside of this object. So that to me says it's going to take a lot of adding and then subtracting, or I've got to put charcoal on and then blend it in and then strip it off. So don't be afraid to let it go, so to speak. All of that hard work now is getting pressed in or embedded into the paper, becoming much more stable, and exactly what I want. As I just continue to push into it, it's going to just keep sinking in deeper, deeper and deeper, and I can start to go back. I can almost think about this as like a lump of clay. I can polish out that surface and start to smooth back and forth between the different colors. Right now I'm avoiding erasing just because this is my glazing phase, and I'd like to separate those things out nice and clean in my mind and in the student mind at first. Okay, so the idea is that's packed down, it's nice and tight into the paper, it's nice and stable, not going anywhere, but it's not overly packed down either. So let's start our next phase, which is erasing. I like the pink pearl. It's got a little bit of a grit to it that I like, because it lets me kind of control, I think, have a little more control over the way it's biting. But what my advice is, and it might seem strange and contradictory, but it's not. I didn't totally invent this. One thing I think that you should do right away is locate your highlight. The highlight, I'm just saying, hey, that's a landmark. That's a big kind of something that is can be seen, you know, from a long way away or whatever, and it's a prominent feature. And so let's locate it. It's not. I didn't erase a huge chunk of it. I put my eraser inside of the outline that I used for it already. But the idea is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the brightest light, and then what I'll do is just start to erase a little bit less as I move out away from it. So the most pressure and the cleanest, you know, removal of charcoal is going to occur right here in my highlight shape. So start in the center of the light burst, yeah, and you can then just kind of feather and drag and swipe at these surrounding areas, and then also starting to feather back and forth. It's very uncomfortable, I know, for beginners to want to do this, but this is the heart of chiaroscuro, is those two things, light and shadow, have to somehow come to a kind of balance and agreement about what is right, and how much is of one or the other is allowable. So this is just my pink pearl. I just let it have kind of movement and flow. If I'm not pressing that hard, so if it accidentally slips, it's not actually taking off too much. And what I'm doing is, when I find something that I like or that I want to brighten up, then I'll dig in just a little bit more. But I'm really just kind of letting that eraser skid around, and not being too protective of the surface. Look, that eraser's right on the drawing. It's not really changing it at all. It only changes it once I'm more committed to it and start to push in up against things. So look, I want that to be sharp, so I'm going to cut in. That means I'm going to take a kind of a sharp edge on my tool and work it right up to the outline and start to create a kind of optical focus or a sharpness occurring right there at that very predictable in a place where we want it to happen. It works great for composition, and it also magically also seems to align more or less perfectly with a lot of light and shadow theory. So just keep it sharp here in the front, and we're going to contrast that sharpness, that focus right there in the very front middle of our object, front middle of our drawing, with softnesses, so contrasting this sharpness and this focus with things that are going to get blended and smoothed out, almost like this is a piece of clay or something that there's no rules at this point, in a sense. Every artist has to investigate strategies for blending and lightening and getting these planes inside of this object to glow correctly. So what I'm doing here is using my pink eraser and just feathering out from the brightest part of the object, and then seeing how that sits with me, and moving down in and lightening up and blending between some of these highlight zones. And that's just my paper towel again. It's another tip that I have for you, is to, after you erase, to take something like a paper towel and just wipe off what you've been erasing. So I would do this now. I want this area to start to stay lighter, so I want to take something that's cleaner for this kind of thing. But I can get rid of streaks and other marks in light areas by taking a clean piece of paper towel or a clean piece of chamois, and I'll show you that right now too here. Here's my clean chamois. Can take that clean chamois. If I'm really trying to smooth out something that's bright and in light, what I want to do, and you can see I can never totally get rid of some of that tone. It's exactly what I need, to kind of support my illusion. But this chamois, I don't want to take it all the way down into the shadow systems down here, because it's just going to strip off all of that charcoal, and then I'll lose a lot of the definition. But what I'm doing here is keeping this polishing action with this piece of chamois leather happening here in the front, middle, and on the top of the ball. This little soft swiping circles basically is kind of like you would think about polishing a stone or something, maybe, or something smooth, and just kind of have to let it, kind of observe it and watch it. This is my pink eraser, and what I'm always doing here is returning to the center of the highlight and feathering the light out from the brightest area. So it's most pressure here, and then as I travel out away from the highlight burst, I can just, I just lighten up. Let that eraser flow and drag and skid over the underlying glazes. Here I'm starting to cut in a little more light in the ground plane back behind the object. And I can start to play around with the shadow edge out here is going to be a little softer. A little more diffused focus out here. A couple things. One, it's farther from our eye, and two, it is farther from the object that's making it. So that's kind of a central rule of shadows and light is, you know, the closer you are to the object that is projecting your cast shadow, the sharper and darker that cast shadow is probably going to appear. And as the section of the ball that's projecting this part of shadow is much farther away, that shadow can lighten up and disappear even. So talented artists are playing not just light and shadow against each other, but we're also playing sharpness against softness and sharpness against softness. So things that are closer to me, things that are closer to the object that's making it, those kinds of shadows. So those are the kinds of little clues that you can use to start to heighten your control of what's happening. So this is my chamois. I'm going to switch to something that doesn't have to be really clean for what I'm going to do next. Just going to use my chamois to, well, I probably shouldn't restate that because my other one's a little dirty. So I'm just going to take my chamois and swipe over the ground plane here. Again, what I'm doing with that chamois is I use it after I erase something. The chamois is kind of what that does is it goes in and gets rid of streaks inside of light areas. And if I take that too far out of the light area, it's going to strip off too much of my dark values. Well, sometimes you have a dark that's really stained in deep and you just need to lighten it. In that case, then you would do that. But I'm just talking about sort of normal strategy, which is don't drag the chamois through your shadows. If you need to soften shadows, try paper towel or blending stick or something like that. And use the chamois primarily for smoothing out colors that are light in value. It's just a kind of a good habit, good recipe. You just, after you erase it something, you're going to get streaks. You're going to change the paper just a little bit. Take your chamois, just kind of hover over those areas you've been erasing. It sort of helps to smooth out some of the irregularities. Here, you know, for this thing to really glow, it's hard to explain, but I really have to sometimes, when I'm lifting the kind of final values here for a top plane, I'm putting quite a bit of pressure on there, and it can maybe be startling to beginners. So the talented artists, again, we have a very dynamic range. Sometimes we're barely touching the surface, and other times it's, you know, it's almost kind of awkward how hard you might be pressing on something. And I wish I could teach a little bit more about, you know, how much pressure and when. But it's so individualized and subtle. But I just will say, you know, this is not something I totally invented. This was something that's shown to me as a student. Is that, you know, sometimes to get that light to happen as it needs to on the top there, you really got to just kind of work at it. I'm not putting excessive pressure, but you know, it's very focused and diligent. All right, so that would be the end of like the erasing phase. What's next? I got to hit my cores. I'm on to this idea of developing cores. So I'm going to come back now with what I would say is my layer 2 charcoal. It's the Conti crayon. It's the black Conti 2B. It's the one that has the black cat on the cover. So again, I'm not going to cover this so much in this video, but after you develop your masses with 6B and then you glaze it down and you erase, this would be the next charcoal black that you would switch over to typically. So it kind of seems like this drawing's been going on for a while. It's really, I'm still just kind of in the middle second phase. So this is my black Conti. What I'm doing is I'm swiping in at my cores. That's always predictable with me. I go right for that sit core. I'm going to lock that base of that object down and create contrast against that shadow there. Next thing I'm going to do is let my hand just kind of swipe around and pick up just a little bit of extra darkness and sharpness here at the front. Okay, with Conti, first of all, I want to make sure there shouldn't be any crumbs or loose stuff sitting on your drawing to get started on this phase. Everything should be totally packed down nice and tight, nice and smooth. If you've had streaks, you can polish them out. A few streaks, not going to matter too much. I'm going to come back and sharpen that up shortly. Start right in here at my sit core, and then I'm going to let that Conti wrap around front and start to sharpen. And oftentimes what I'm going to do is start to mass in or hatch in or glaze. I'm just kind of lightly swiping between these two cores here. And what the idea is, I'm just darkening up this end of the shape so that the values are flowing out that way. Yeah, and I'm also sharpening this, setting up ultimately what's going to become maybe one of the absolute most sharpest edges in my whole drawing. This is what separates the old masters, the talented artists from amateurs. People are afraid to make a shadow sharp. People get shadows too dark or not there at all. This is one of the oldest tricks in the book that nobody ever talks about, but we have to have sharpness here in my cast shadow, in our cast shadows, and that sharpness is going to get contrasted against what starts to happen here. So if this is kind of outline-y, you can cut in right up against it. This is a little more challenging. I can have a little sharp origin right here at the outline of the ball, and then it's going to it's slippery. I've got to mass in a core shadow that swipes across the front of the ball. Not too dark, but it's got to be there, and I want to do it. Even though it might seem like, man, I don't want to or I don't need to, but you just got to teach yourself to dive in, and what we're doing with the Conti is we're putting it in our cores. That is what it's for. So don't shy away from your cores. You've got to use the Conti to swipe at them and to hatch at them and to outline places that we know now we have 3 cores. It's a thing now, it's official. We can just call them that now, and when we draw we can go for them. So we've got form, sit, and rim. As the artist brings those cores into alignment, they're moving closer to proving that shadow system. If I have to drag, sometimes it seems challenging to know, did I put it there? But you just have to have faith. And then the other thing that I do with Conti, a little different now, is I'm going to start to glaze and blend things in a little more localized manner. One thing that's a little different for me between the 6B and the Conti is that with the Conti, I tend to work a little more locally. That means what I'm going to do is I'm going to mass it out. Remember, massing means fresh loose charcoal, fresh loose mass, or fresh loose hatching. And we contrast fresh charcoal with anything that's been rubbed in or touched or blended or glazed. So again, here's what I'm saying is with Conti, my kind of exception or difference is that as I construct or draw with Conti, I'm going to be blending it right away or much more quickly thereafter. And those things that I'm blending are going to stay, more localized and within those shapes that I'm trying to depict. So this is just a blending stick. It's kind of a common move. You have to maybe teach yourself, but there's a lot of times where you have to soften and blend inside of a shadow. So it's just it works well for a number of reasons, but softening and thinning out and blending charcoals in your shadow, it tends to be a good move. And then, the other thing I'll do with this blender is it's tricky. It's like, what should I do with it? I could go like that across it, but I could also lay it down and use it as kind of a push or a press. So, I didn't maybe sharpen quite enough, but that's the idea. You can also lay your blender down on the side too. and use it not just at the point, but we can pick up on the blender, we can pick up broader, smooth, softer, wider areas that have you know, a more broad effect than maybe what you intuitively would be developing just from the point of the object. So erasers, blenders, charcoal sticks, you know, you can use them with a point on a tip like a pencil, but a lot of those things you can lay them down on the side and kind of get a much more broad tool to sort of do kind of this thing we keep talking about, where you sort of have to color outside of the line sometimes. So I did a little Conti, a little bit of blending now, and I'm just back to using my eraser again. I know a common thing, you add a little charcoal, you glaze it down, and then you may have to erase it. Use your eraser to go back, make corrections, and lift light that got too, you know, out of focus, or that got too dull. Okay, I did my cores, 3 cores. Form core, sit core, rim core. Conti is for that. Yep. Put Conti into your cores. But we're also going to use it in our space tone. And incidentally, I'm just going to save a little time here too. This next round of darkening that I would do with the Heritage, the thicker chunk. Apologize, I don't have the packaging. Oh wait, here it is. This next round that I might do with this stuff, I'm also going to put this Heritage into the same exact places. So this is sort of that late phase in the drawing, with like step number 5, where I'm redrawing stuff with different colors of black. It's a secret trick, say. But I don't go back now after I've glazed and erased. I don't want to go back and continue on with this. Everything that I do with that is just going to melt down into our existing color. It's just going to get dark and gray and muddy. It's not going to let us do what just happened right here. So we're getting this because we have a contrast of materials, and that material has a slightly different color, slightly different working properties that are allowing us to hit just the right accents without really a lot of effort, honestly. It's very easy once you know where to target. Okay, still Conti 2B in my hand, and I did show you I'm starting to swipe in across the front middle of the ball, and you can look at your handouts here and you can see that core is, you know, a lot of artists have a similar agreement about it transitioning from up here and moving down across the front of the ball, and every artist has to start to develop their own preferences for how dark or how light, or you know, the nature, the look of it. That's where your originality comes from, is how you conduct yourself, how you handle yourself doing tasks that thousands of, you know, hundreds of thousands of people have attempted over history. So, you know, your originality, you could never reinvent this, but your originality comes from your spin that you're going to put on this image. Conti in the coarse, Conti in the space tone. Okay, I'm going to cut in. I haven't really showed that before, but what I want to do, sometimes when I go to do a background, it's easier for me to turn my artwork. So I've just got the charcoal stick, or it's the Conti stick. I just have it laid right up against the outline of the ball, and I'm kind of swiping in a new coat, a new layer for the background. I'm going to start up against the edge, And the weird thing about Conti is it's actually a little bit hard to see as you're applying it if you're using it as I'm instructing you. So that's a good thing because it's kind of forgiving. But what will happen, how you start, one way that, again, the reason I'm saying it, there's an exception here, is after you mass it out, glaze it down faster than you would with your first round. You go for glazing that Conti right away, and you'll see right what's going to happen is as soon as I touch this, I'm going to keep it a little more localized. So I don't want to I don't want to stain this anymore. It's got a beautiful glow that I don't want to remove this, what's happening here. This is starting to work for me. So if I stain that or pull Conti over that, I won't be able to bring it back up. So it's okay if a little bit slips over or spills over, because I like there to be, sort of some uncertainty. But it's much more focused and localized, and I'm just swiping over the new Conti. That's the exception, or the difference between Conti and 6B, is that you should hold off on glazing 6B. But when you get to this later phase in your drawing, you should start glazing your Conti more or less right away as you apply it. It's going to be different, and it's going to look different, it's going to feel different, it's going to do different things, and so many things I can't quite explain to you, but you just have to jump in and try it. And what I would say to you is, here's what's happening, is that there's a formula, a set of charcoals, a order of charcoals that I'm always drawing with, and I'm trying to do the same thing every drawing with those charcoals. So Conti is for my cores, 6B is for massing in my planes and doing some line art. Sure, there's exceptions, and you might have to go back and forth or play around with things, but what I'm saying here is that I think that this kind of drawing is a bit like music in a sense. Meaning, when a musician plays a song or sings a song, they're going to start at the beginning and they're going to move through that song. There's going to be a predictable order or narrative or timeline for singing it or playing it. And they're going to play through it. Whether they make a mistake in the middle or whatever, but the idea would be, you'd play through it whether it was perfect or whether it was choppy, but you played through it as you should. The idea is you played the song. You don't stop in the middle. If you have an audience, you don't get to stop, and you just have to play through it. I think that charcoal drawing is like that too. That if we follow these sets of steps in order, start with 6B, then you do your erasing and your glazing and your erasing, and then you move to Conti, and then you move to Heritage. That you're kind of like playing a song. You're doing something that's kind of a formula, or that has a kind of a prescribed order that has to be done or should be done at the right time in the sequence. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense. You don't sing the end of the song at the beginning. And so, again, what I'm suggesting is that it's actually very, very liberating and freeing for beginners and advanced artists, which is you're just going to have to play the song. You're going to follow the set of steps, and it's going to turn out, how it turns out. And that there's a merit in learning that process. So then the other thing that you'll notice is when I'm not talking so much, or when you're drawing on your own, that maybe some of these phases actually don't take that long for any one thing. So I've moved through Conti, and here's my Heritage, my thick black one, same place. I just use this. What it's good for is finger blending. And work that into the same region, just a couple of little strokes is all it takes sometimes. And here's the exception with this one. A lot of times with this one, I'm going to finger blend. Doesn't take much. Okay, I want to stress that. You might not need as much as you think. And here's the other crazy thing about this color. It's so much darker than what's happening with those other two charcoals that it just takes so little pressure actually for you to open your eyes and for you to see that there's way more to that value scale now that you could activate. And where we're activating it is in our cores. Okay, those cores are the only places in this drawing where we should be approaching something that starts to look close to black. Okay, what we're doing, we have these little bursts or dynamics of that dark value. But then you have to quickly come out with strategies and methods for blending and feathering so that it doesn't just look like a black lump there, but is just sort of almost imperceptible, and it's quickly changing out of pitch black into, you know, something, another value that's going to support our expectations about what's happening here on the inside of a smooth white ball. So I think, you know, you can see a lot of different scenarios, but this particular model that I'm drawing is very dramatic because we have one point on a white form where that darkness is exceeding or is getting darker than the background. You can actually have a white object where the core is actually it is still lighter than the background. But in this case, I have this one sort of dramatic, compositional passage where I start to lighten, put just a little bit of, it's called backlight, a little backlight right there to create a very dramatic and clean looking origin for this core shadow here. Everything else is going to be softed and blended, and you know, we're looking for a nice clean, but it's very challenging. It's like a soft but very specific separations of tone as they are traveling up the surface of the ball, moving out of light. And this is one place where artist skill really comes into play. Knowledge about light and shadow, about art materials comes into play. So it's all really, you know, starting to roll together to talk about, you know, showing off a lot of different skills simultaneously. Here I'm going to cut in. So my rule with heritage, with Conti, is once I introduce those things into my object, I absolutely have to introduce some of that into the space. If I don't, stuff just seems unbalanced. So be bold, don't be afraid. It doesn't take much, okay? I'm just trying to kind of loosely distribute this final coat, final color. And I'll think you can experiment, but I'm just going to finger blend and leave a little bit of texture back there too, on purpose. So takeaway here is not everything in charcoal should be smooth or rubbed in or blended. Sometimes it's beautiful to leave, especially later in the game here, leave a little bit of texture. Don't overblend things. It's a lot like cooking or building anything that you might already be kind of skilled at or good at. You know, it's just going to take some trial and error, and it's really hard to sometimes tap into all the subtleties. But it's okay. Not everything in a charcoal drawing, believe me, it shouldn't be all rubbed smooth. You should experiment with the range of some brush strokes or some marks showing, some completely rubbed in. All artists, again, that's your originality. It's not the ball itself. It's how did you do it, and your interpretation of the process, the set of steps. I'm so close to finishing this thing. So I did my heritage, and now I need to do my highlights in white. Every object, putting a highlight on it, is an individual, is unique. This particular texture, size of ball. Here's my recipe. I've got this area that's I've already lit up pretty good, but before I use the white, what I want to do is clean off. This is my pencil eraser, and the way that I hold this is put it in your hand and then turn it upside down like that. You can't even see what's going on camera, I know, and I apologize for that, but this is the absolute best way to handle this tool, because what I can do is I can put my fingertip right up there on the end of the eraser and deliver the point right where I want it. If I'm just trying to hold it like that, this thing is flopping all over the place. It's not of any use to anybody, honestly. But if I can direct the energy of that to a much tighter place, then all of a sudden it becomes much more useful. Okay, so here what I'm doing, this is my chamois. I'm just going to start off by lightening around the highlight and making sure that those areas that are around the highlight are more or less as bright as I can get them with the chamois. Take my eraser and put it right back into the center of the highlight and start to erase in a little burst. Well, I don't know if you remember, but there used to be a charcoal outline around that highlight shape. What I'm doing, and over again, is basically going in and kind of erasing inside of that outline, but also erasing the outline itself so that it kind of sinks in to the underlying tonality. Drawing a ball, there's oftentimes you have to do a little bit of edging here. Just take something and swipe around or stroke around. Sometimes in digital art it's called stroking. But stroking the edge of something with your tools is one of the best ways you can get things, different zones of your picture to integrate, to flow together, looking more optical, more visual. When you get into reality, your realism, things need to be softened. Edges need a little bit of revision to get the characteristic that needs to happen. This is my chamois. Again, the chamois is for getting streaks out of light areas primarily. I can use it to soak up stuff I don't want, but if I use it to soak up something here, I wouldn't want to put it all the way down in here. I did want to show you guys this too. There's a value scale on this handout, and it's not just there for looks. I actually use that, and the way that I use that is I'm going to take this piece of paper and fold that value scale in half. Yeah, just like that. And what happens is now I have little clean chunks of gray that I can put up next to pieces of my art and compare colors across. So one thing we want to take away is that our cast shadow down here should only be about 50% on the interior, the cores. I'm not talking about the sit core, rim core, I'm talking about the fill color, the value on the inside. 50%, somewhere in the middle of our value range. So typically what happens charcoal drawing is that shadows get overly dark. So this is normal. This is another thing I use the chamois for at the late end phase of the drawing, is soaking up some color from the inside of dark planes or dark shadows. So it's kind of a very peculiar thing, especially beginners, and it can be kind of just like fun and mind-blowing, but now what I'm going to do is come back and kind of lighten this dark shadow. Like first to get it to be one of your darkest things in the drawing, but then what happens is it gets kind of overcompensated. This is the thing, I'm just kind of stripping, not trying to soak up everything, just kind of soak up some of the top coat and simultaneously also pushing in charcoal. But I'll just say this takeaway is beginners, amateurs always get the interior color here too dark. It doesn't take much actually. Once the shapes are solidified, it really doesn't take much value here for your brain to see that as a shadow anymore. So now you can see what happens if you even try to get rid of it. It's like our drawing is so stable and so strong. We have a lot of ability to play around with atmosphere and line quality and edge quality in here. It's a blast. Okay, back to that highlight. I was talking about, stroking edges, and I'm setting up for the highlight. I'm trying to finish this up. So there's a lot of things, kind of little details I'm sort of looking at and trying to pull together for this resolution, the final note in my song. I've got a little bit of white Conti. I'm just going to work it into this highlight that I erase off completely. The idea is you don't want the Conti to touch any of the underlying charcoal. And I'm just going to apply that as kind of almost like a thick impressionistic brush stroke. Right there in the front top of the highlight. I'm not trying to completely color it in. The shape of the highlight, so there's a lot of sort of hinting at it, but not necessarily coloring inside of the lines again. And the key is I'm going to hint at it. I'm not going to blend it too much, and I want to leave it pretty fresh. It's like a little garnish or a design element that you're going to put on at the end, and you're not going to monkey around with it too much, because if you overwork it, it's going to cause all kinds of problems. So just trust me on that. You don't want the white to mix in with a lot of other stuff, so don't use very much of the white, and only use it in some key places. Now here's a little exception. So one of the main places you use the white is top plane highlights only. Never ever ever put it around an outline. It's an amateur move. Kills all sense of illusion instantly. White's got to sit there, it's got to be clean, it's got to sit in the highlight, and we're not going to overuse it, and I'm not going to attempt to blend it down into these zones. I'm not going to attempt to use it as a whiteout or correction fluid. Here's another little quick tip. You can use the white in one other place besides top plane highlights, and you can sometimes use it on an up-facing plane that has a very bright, sharp shadow on it, and I can use it to continue to focus and sharpen the front of that shadow, where again, compositionally and dramatically, I might want to have a little extra brightness here at the front of my object, brighter and sharper. So that's it. Keep that white fairly sparingly. Don't overwork it. You could use a blending stick or your fingers or whatever, but I'm suggesting that it's also developing a kind of fluidity and confidence to just put down some strokes that sort of seem like, they look right. This is an okay time for you to have a little bit of flashiness or chunks or something, or thicker stuff happening. That's it, everybody. Thank you. I hope that you were able to make it to the end of this. This is a very classic lesson. I give this every semester in class, and we typically would do this drawing together in class, and then it would go in your portfolio. So at this point, I think you should try to do this drawing yourself, because I am going to be looking for this one in your portfolio. In addition to this, there's usually a series that goes along with this, which I'm probably not going to detail all of those drawings, but what I may do if I get time is to do a couple other useful objects and do it as a kind of a time lapse. But that's it. I ran through my set of steps, and I ran through the development of the chiaroscuro ordering. Kind of interrelated, kind of different things. Here we have theory about light and shadow, how that's behaving. Here we have theory about what art materials to use and when.